I never thought I'd be sitting in a lawyer's office at 72, staring down a daughter-in-law who looked at me like I was a piece of gum stuck to her designer shoe. But life has a funny way of throwing curveballs when you least expect them, especially when those curveballs come wrapped in grief and greed. My son Daniel had been dead for exactly 3 weeks. 3 weeks since I got that phone call that every mother dreads. The one that shatters your world into a million pieces that you'll never quite fit back together the same way. Daniel wasn't just my only child. He was my whole world, my best friend. And honestly, the only person who still laughed at my terrible jokes about getting old. If you're watching this, subscribe and let me know where you're watching from. The thing about Daniel was that he'd become something I never saw coming. 2 years ago, he was just my sweet boy who worked in IT and lived in a modest apartment downtown, spending his weekends helping me reorganize my closets and fixing my ancient computer when it decided to have what he called senior moments. He was the kid who'd rather read a book than go to parties, who collected vintage comic books, and who still called me every morning on his way to work just to check in. Then, he started making these videos online, talking about mental health, sharing his story about overcoming anxiety and depression. It started innocently enough, just a little camera set up in his bedroom, talking to maybe 50 people who'd found his channel by accident. I remember him showing me his first video, nervous and excited, asking what I thought. "You're helping people, sweetheart," I told him, though I didn't really understand what subscribers meant or why strangers on the internet cared about my son's opinion. But Daniel had something special, something that transcended the screen. He talked about panic attacks with the authority of someone who'd lived through them. He discussed therapy without shame, medication without stigma, healing without false promises of easy fixes. When he talked about the night he almost didn't make it, when he shared how I'd driven across town at 2 in the morning just to sit with him until the crisis passed, people listened, really listened. I didn't really understand it at first, this whole internet thing, but Daniel had a way of making people feel seen, heard, understood. His comment sections became virtual support groups. People shared their own stories, their own struggles, their own victories. He'd spend hours responding to messages, often staying up until dawn to talk someone through a dark moment. The growth was exponential and terrifying. First 1,000 subscribers, then 10,000, then hundreds of thousands. Before I knew it, he had millions of followers, hanging on his every word. Major brands started reaching out, offering him more money for a single sponsored post than I'd made in a year of teaching. Mental health organizations wanted him as a spokesperson. Publishers offered book deals. Streaming services pitched documentary ideas. But what really changed everything was when he started the foundation. It began with Daniel reading comments from people who couldn't afford therapy, people who were struggling with mental health issues but didn't have insurance, or whose insurance wouldn't cover treatment. He started small, just paying for a few therapy sessions here and there, but as his platform grew, so did his ability to help. The Daniel Thompson Foundation for Mental Health Access became a legitimate operation, funding therapy for thousands of people who otherwise couldn't afford it. He hired staff, worked with licensed therapists, created a whole infrastructure for mental health support. The money from his brand partnerships, his merchandise, his speaking engagements, it all went back into helping people. My quiet, introverted son had become what they call an influencer, though he always hated that term. "I'm not influencing anyone, Mom," he'd say whenever I used that word. "I'm just sharing my truth, and if that helps people find their own truth, then that's beautiful." He never lost that humble perspective, never let the fame go to his head, never forgot that behind every username was a real person dealing with real pain. The money started rolling in faster than either of us could comprehend. We're talking millions, not thousands. Daniel bought a beautiful house in the hills, traded his old Honda for a Tesla. But you know what he never changed? He still called me every Sunday, still brought me groceries when my arthritis was acting up, still made terrible puns that made me groan and laugh at the same time. Then he met Cassandra. Now, I want to be fair here. When your son introduces you to his girlfriend, you try to give her the benefit of the doubt, even when every instinct you have is screaming warnings. Cassandra was beautiful in that Instagram way. Perfect makeup, perfect hair, perfect everything. She looked like she'd stepped out of a magazine, all glossy surfaces and calculated angles. She had her own social media following, though significantly smaller than Daniel's, focused on what she called luxury lifestyle content. This meant showing off expensive handbags and restaurant visits, and basically everything I thought was vapid and meaningless. But hey, I'm old-fashioned. I'll never forget the first time Daniel brought her to my house for dinner. I'd spent all day making his favorite meal, pot roast with those little potatoes he loved as a kid, green beans from my garden, and my grandmother's apple pie recipe. Simple, comforting food made with love. Cassandra arrived wearing white jeans and a silk blouse that probably cost more than my monthly electric bill, carrying a designer purse that I later learned was worth several $1,000s. "Oh, how charming," she said when she saw my little house, and I could hear the condescension dripping from every word. "It's so vintage." She said vintage like it was a disease. During dinner, she barely touched the food, claiming she was mostly plant-based now and had already eaten. She spent most of the meal taking photos of herself with Daniel, adjusting the lighting with her phone's flash, asking him to look more natural for the camera. Daniel seemed enchanted by her attention, laughing at jokes that weren't particularly funny, eager to please her in a way that made my mother's heart ache. "Daniel tells me you used to be a teacher," she said to me, scrolling through her phone while she talked. "That must have been fulfilling in its own way." "It was," I replied, trying to keep my voice level. "I taught high school English for 35 years. Loved every minute of it." "Oh, I could never do that," she laughed, still not looking up from her screen. "All those hormonal teenagers? And the pay. Well, Daniel says you're doing fine now that you're retired, but it must have been hard living on a teacher's salary all those years." What bothered me wasn't her content or even her obvious obsession with material things. It was the way she looked at Daniel, not with love, not with admiration for the person he was, but with calculation, like she was adding up his net worth every time he spoke. When Daniel talked about his charity work, his face lighting up as he described a young woman whose life had been saved by the therapy funding they'd provided. Cassandra would nod politely, but I caught her rolling her eyes when she thought no one was looking. After dinner, as I was clearing dishes, I overheard her talking to Daniel in the living room. "Babe, this is all very sweet, but don't you think your charity work is getting a little excessive? I mean, you're literally giving away millions of dollars to strangers. That's money we could be investing, building our future together." "It's not our money, Cass," Daniel replied, and I could hear the slight tension in his voice. "It's money I earn because people trust me to use my platform responsibly. I can't just take that trust and turn it into personal profit." "But you could scale back a little," she pressed. "Maybe be more selective. Focus on building your brand instead of trying to save the world." "My brand is saving the world," Daniel said firmly, and I felt a surge of pride at my son's conviction. There was a pause, then Cassandra's voice turned sweet and manipulative. "Of course, baby. I love how passionate you are. I just want to make sure you're not burning yourself out. You work so hard, and I worry about you." But I heard what she didn't say. I heard the calculation behind every word, the way she was planting seeds of doubt about the very thing that gave Daniel's life meaning. She was subtle about it, I'll give her that, always framing her concerns as caring, as worry for his well-being, as love. The red flags kept coming. She'd show up to family events with professional photographers, turning every birthday, every holiday, every gathering into a photo shoot. She'd interrupt conversations to take selfies, pose Daniel in specific positions, adjust his clothing or hair to look better for the camera. Our family dinners became content creation sessions, and Daniel seemed to think this was normal, even romantic. "She's helping me build my brand, Mom," he'd say, when I gently questioned why every moment of his life needed to be documented and shared. "She understands the business side of this better than I do." What Daniel didn't see, but I did, was how Cassandra talked differently when she thought he wasn't listening. To me, she'd complain about how boring his friends were, how exhausting his charity events were, how she wished he'd focus more on monetizing his influence instead of giving it away for free. To other people, she'd hint about their future plans, the bigger house they'd buy, the expensive vacations they'd take, the luxury lifestyle his success would afford them. She never mentioned the foundation, never talked about the good work he was doing, never seemed to understand that for Daniel, helping people wasn't a side project. It was the entire point. They got married 6 months after meeting, and the engagement announcement was, predictably, a social media extravaganza. Cassandra posted professional photos of the proposal, which had been staged at a luxury resort in Malibu, with a photographer conveniently hidden behind nearby rocks, along with close-up shots of her enormous engagement ring. The comment section was flooded with congratulations and questions about wedding plans, brand partnerships, and whether they'd be documenting their journey to the altar. The wedding itself was a lavish affair that cost more than my first house, and I swear half the guests were there for the Instagram photos rather than to celebrate love. It was held at an exclusive vineyard in Napa Valley, with every detail coordinated by a team of wedding planners who specialized in influencer events. The ceremony was beautiful, I'll admit, but it felt more like a corporate production than a sacred union. I remember sitting in the front row, watching my son promise to love and cherish this woman, and feeling a deep unease that I couldn't shake. Daniel looked genuinely happy, radiant even, but Cassandra looked like a woman who just closed the deal of a lifetime. The reception featured 3 different photographers, a videographer team, and a social media coordinator whose job was to manage the official hashtag and ensure optimal posting times for maximum engagement. Guests were given guidelines about what to share and when, and there was an actual media kit with suggested captions and photo angles. During the father-daughter dance, mother-son dance, since Daniel's father had passed when he was 12, my boy whispered in my ear, "I love you, Mom. Thank you for always believing in me, even when I didn't believe in myself." "I love you too, sweetheart," I whispered back, trying to ignore the way Cassandra was positioned at the edge of the dance floor, directing a photographer to capture specific angles of our moment together. The honeymoon was documented extensively across both their social media accounts. 2 weeks in the Maldives, staying in an overwater villa that cost more per night than most people make in a month. But even in paradise, I noticed something in Daniel's posts that troubled me. His usual authenticity seemed strained, his captions less genuine, his photos more posed. It was subtle, but I knew my son. Something was changing. When they returned, Daniel seemed different, still loving, still checking on me regularly, but there was a tension in him that hadn't been there before. He'd started second-guessing his charitable work, asking questions about whether he was being too generous, or if he should be more strategic about his giving. These weren't thoughts that had ever occurred to him before, and I had a pretty good idea where they were coming from. Daniel seemed happy, though, or at least he seemed to think he was happy. That's what I kept telling myself when I saw the subtle changes in him, the way his spontaneous generosity was becoming more calculated, the way his genuine concern for others was being filtered through questions of brand alignment and strategic impact. The marriage lasted exactly 4 months, though I didn't know it was ending until after it was over. Daniel died in what the police called a tragic accident. He was found at the bottom of the stairs in their multi-million-dollar home in the Hollywood Hills, apparently having fallen and hit his head on the marble floor of their entryway. The official cause of death was blunt force trauma resulting from an accidental fall. Cassandra's story was seamless and tragic. She claimed she'd been out getting her nails done for a charity gala they were supposed to attend that evening and came home to find him. She'd called 911 immediately, she said, tried to revive him herself, was devastated that she couldn't save him. The paramedics found her sobbing over his body, her designer dress stained with his blood, the picture of a grief-stricken widow. The timing was convenient, I thought, but grief makes you paranoid. Or so I told myself, or so everyone else told me when I dared to voice my suspicions. "Eleanor, you're in shock," well-meaning friends would say. "You're looking for someone to blame because accidents are too random, too senseless. But sometimes terrible things just happen." But I knew my son. Daniel was athletic, coordinated, careful. He'd been climbing those stairs every day for months. They were well lit, not steep, with a sturdy railing. He was 28 years old, in perfect health, with the reflexes of someone who ran marathons for fun. The idea that he'd simply lost his footing and fallen hard enough to die seemed impossible to me. The police investigation was perfunctory. No signs of forced entry, no evidence of a struggle, no indication of foul play. Cassandra's alibi checked out. She was indeed at the nail salon, with timestamps on her credit card and security footage showing her arrival and departure. The salon staff confirmed she'd been there, getting an elaborate manicure and pedicure that took nearly 3 hours. But here's what bothered me. Cassandra had never gotten her nails done before an event. She had a personal manicurist who came to the house twice a week. Why would she suddenly decide to go to a public salon on the day of an important charity gala, the kind of event where appearances mattered most to her? When I mentioned this to the detective assigned to the case, he looked at me with the kind of patronizing sympathy reserved for hysterical mothers. "Mrs. Thompson, Grief can make us see patterns that aren't there. Sometimes people change their routines for no particular reason. Maybe she wanted to try a new place. Maybe her regular person wasn't available. There's no evidence to suggest anything suspicious happened here. The funeral was a circus that would have horrified Daniel if he'd been alive to see it. His fans showed up by the hundreds, turning his memorial into some kind of social media event. People live-streamed the service, posted tribute videos in the parking lot, and created an impromptu shrine of flowers, cards, and fan art that stretched for blocks around the funeral home. Cassandra played the grieving widow beautifully, posting heartfelt tributes and black and white photos of herself looking devastated. She even started a Daniel's Legacy hashtag that went viral. It made me sick, but I was too numb with grief to fight it. Which brings me to today, sitting in this sterile conference room with its fluorescent lights and the smell of fresh coffee that nobody was drinking. The law office of Pemberton, Walsh and Associates occupied the top floor of a downtown high-rise, all glass and steel and the kind of understated luxury that whispered rather than shouted about money. Lawrence Pemberton, Daniel's lawyer, sat at the head of the polished oak table with a manila folder that apparently contained my son's final wishes. Cassandra sat across from me, dressed in designer black that probably cost more than my monthly Social Security check, flanked by two lawyers who looked like they charged by the minute just to breathe. Her grief outfit was impeccable, a Chanel suit that managed to be both mourning appropriate and Instagram ready, with just enough subtle jewelry to remind everyone that she was wealthy, but not enough to seem inappropriately flashy. Her makeup was perfect, her hair styled in soft waves that looked effortless, but probably took hours to achieve. I'd worn my best dress, a navy blue one Daniel had bought me for Mother's Day last year. "This color brings out your eyes, Mom," he'd said when he gave it to me, along with matching earrings and a card that read, "Thank you for being my biggest supporter and my best friend." It felt appropriate, wearing something he'd chosen. I needed him close to me, even if it was just through a piece of fabric. The contrast between us was stark, and I'm sure it wasn't accidental. Cassandra looked like money, success, the kind of woman who belonged in this world of million-dollar estates and legal proceedings. I looked like what I was, a retired teacher from a middle-class background who'd never expected to be sitting in a room discussing her son's fortune. "Thank you all for coming," Lawrence began, adjusting his glasses. He was a kind man in his 60s who'd been Daniel's lawyer since the money started coming in, recommended by another influencer who'd needed help structuring his business affairs. "We're here to read the last will and testament of Daniel Marcus Thompson, dated March 15th of this year." March 15th. Daniel had died on July 3rd. The will was only a few months old, which meant he'd updated it after his marriage to Cassandra. This gave me a tiny spark of hope. Maybe he'd seen through her after all. Maybe he'd protected himself, and by extension, me. But Cassandra looked supremely confident, checking her phone discreetly and occasionally glancing at her lawyers with the kind of expression that suggested this was all a formality. She clearly expected good news. "Can we please expedite this?" she said, her voice carrying that slight whine it always had when she didn't get her way immediately. "I have a meeting with the Foundation Board at 3, and there are several urgent matters that need my attention." The Foundation Board, Daniel's charity, which she'd somehow managed to position herself as the head of, despite having zero experience in nonprofit work and even less genuine interest in mental health advocacy. It had happened so smoothly, so naturally, that by the time I realized what was occurring, she was already making decisions about funding allocations and program directions. "Of course we need to discuss the Foundation's future," one of her lawyers interjected. "Mrs. Thompson will be inheriting significant responsibilities along with significant assets, and she'll need guidance on how to manage them appropriately." I bit my tongue, literally bit it until I tasted copper, to keep from saying what I really thought about their assumptions regarding my capabilities. They were already talking about me like I was an elderly invalid who'd need their help to tie my shoes, let alone manage my son's estate. Lawrence nodded diplomatically. "Of course. Let me begin with the primary bequests." He opened the folder and pulled out several documents. The pages looked official and intimidating, covered in legal language that might as well have been written in a foreign alphabet. "To my beloved wife, Cassandra Marie Thompson, I leave my personal effects, including jewelry, clothing, and personal memorabilia, our joint bank accounts, and the house at 1247 Hillside Drive, along with its contents and furnishings." Cassandra's lips curved into what she probably thought was a sad smile, but it looked more like satisfaction to me. She glanced across the table at me, and I swear I saw triumph in her eyes. It was subtle, just a quick flash, but it was there. To my mother, Eleanor May Thompson, Lawrence continued, and my heart clenched at hearing my name spoken in connection with Daniel's will. The words seemed to echo in the quiet room, heavy with finality. I leave my heartfelt gratitude for a lifetime of love and support, and my hope that she will find peace in knowing how much she meant to me. That was it. That was the whole sentence. After 28 years of being Daniel's mother, after supporting his dreams, after being his biggest cheerleader and closest confidant, my inheritance was gratitude and hope. The silence in the room was deafening. I could hear the tick of the expensive clock on the wall, the distant hum of traffic from the street below, the barely audible whisper of the air conditioning. My chest felt tight, like I couldn't quite get enough air, but I forced myself to keep my expression neutral. Cassandra couldn't help herself. She actually smirked, a quick, satisfied expression that she tried to hide behind a tissue. "I told you, Eleanor," she said, using that patronizing tone she'd perfected during her brief marriage to my son. Her voice carried false sympathy, like she was delivering bad news that she secretly enjoyed sharing. "Daniel and I discussed this extensively before the accident. He felt that at your age, managing a large inheritance would be too stressful, too overwhelming. He was worried about your health, your ability to handle complex financial decisions." I stared at her, feeling something cold and hard settling in my chest like a stone. "He said that?" "Oh yes," she continued, warming to her subject like a cat in sunlight. She leaned forward slightly, her perfectly manicured hands folded on the table. "He was very concerned about elderly people being taken advantage of by financial scams, identity theft, unscrupulous investment advisors. You know how these predators target seniors. He thought it was better this way, safer. He wanted you to be comfortable without the burden of responsibility." Each word felt like a small slap. The implication was clear. I was too old, too naive, too incompetent to handle my own son's legacy. "Besides," she added, with what she probably thought was kindness, "the house will probably need to be sold anyway. Daniel mentioned that the property taxes alone would be overwhelming for someone on a fixed income like yours. And the maintenance costs for a home that size, well, it's just not practical." One of her lawyers, a sharp-faced woman with steel-gray hair and the kind of smile that never reached her eyes, leaned forward. "Mrs. Thompson, we'd be happy to help you find appropriate housing. There are some very nice senior communities in the area that would be perfect for someone in your situation. Assisted living facilities with meal programs, social activities, medical support on site. Someone in my situation. Someone old, alone, expendable, like I was already dead and just too stupid to realize it." The other lawyer, a younger man who kept checking his expensive watch, added, "We can also help coordinate the sale of any personal effects you might want to liquidate. I'm sure there are items of value that could provide additional financial security for your retirement years." They were already planning my future, already deciding how to parcel out the remnants of my life into manageable, senior-friendly pieces. They spoke about me like I wasn't even in the room, like I was a problem to be solved rather than a person with feelings and opinions. But here's the thing about being 72 and having buried your only child. You don't have much left to lose. And when you don't have much left to lose, you stop caring about being polite. "Cassandra," I said, my voice steady despite the rage building in my chest, "you've known my son for exactly 10 months. I've known him for 28 years. If you think he would leave me with nothing but gratitude, then you didn't know him at all." Her smirk faltered slightly. "Eleanor, I understand you're emotional right now, but nothing." I turned to Lawrence. Is that really all he left me? Gratitude? Lawrence's expression was unreadable, but I caught something in his eyes, something that looked almost like anticipation. "Actually, Mrs. Thompson, there's more. Daniel left specific instructions that I was not to reveal the full contents of his will until after the primary bequests were read and acknowledged." The temperature in the room seemed to drop 10 degrees. Cassandra's smirk disappeared entirely. "What do you mean, more?" she demanded. Lawrence reached into his folder again and pulled out a sealed envelope with my name written on it in Daniel's familiar handwriting. My heart nearly stopped. Even in death, my boy was still taking care of me. Daniel left a letter specifically for his mother, to be read aloud in the presence of all beneficiaries. Lawrence looked directly at me. "Would you like me to read it, or would you prefer to read it yourself?" My hands were shaking too badly to hold anything steady. "Please, you read it." Lawrence carefully opened the envelope and unfolded what looked like several pages of Daniel's handwriting. He cleared his throat and began, "Mom, If you're hearing this, then I'm gone, and I'm so sorry for the pain you must be feeling. I know how much you worry about me, how much you've always protected me, and now I need you to know that I've been trying to protect you too." I felt tears starting, but I blinked them back. Daniel's voice seemed to fill the room through Lawrence's words, and I could almost see him sitting there, earnest and determined, writing these words with the same careful attention he'd always given to important things. "I need to tell you some things that I couldn't say while I was alive, things I discovered about Cassandra that broke my heart and opened my eyes to truths I didn't want to see. 3 weeks ago, I hired a private investigator to look into some financial irregularities I'd noticed with the foundation accounts. What I found was worse than I could have imagined. Cassandra had gone completely white, her carefully applied makeup standing out starkly against her suddenly pale skin." Lawrence continued reading, his voice steady and clear. "She's been systematically stealing from my charity fund, Mom, not just taking a little here and there, but running a sophisticated embezzlement scheme that's been going on for months. She's taken over $200,000 intended for therapy funding and used it for her personal expenses. Designer clothes, jewelry, that new car she claimed was for foundation business, even a down payment on a condo in Miami that she bought under her maiden name." The silence in the room was deafening. I looked across the table at Cassandra, who was gripping the edge of the table so hard her knuckles had gone white. "I have all the evidence, Mom. Bank records, receipts, credit card statements, even recordings of phone calls where she laughed about how easy it was to fool me. She called me pathetically trusting to her friends, said I was so focused on helping other people that I never paid attention to what was happening in my own house." One of Cassandra's lawyers was frantically typing on his phone, while the other was whispering urgently in her ear. But she wasn't responding, just staring at Lawrence like he was reading her death sentence. "But that's not the worst part," Lawrence continued reading. "I also found out that she's been planning to leave me almost from the moment we got married. She's been having an affair with Marcus Rivera, that fitness influencer with 3 million followers. They've been together for 4 months, not 2 weeks like I initially thought. They've been planning our divorce since before our honeymoon was over." Cassandra shot to her feet, her chair scraping against the floor with a sound like nails on a chalkboard. "This is ridiculous. He was paranoid, depressed. He wasn't thinking clearly after the foundation stress." "Sit down," I said, and something in my voice made her comply immediately. There was a power in my words that surprised even me, the authority of a woman who had finally reached her limit. "Let him finish." Lawrence looked down at the letter again, his voice taking on an even more serious tone. "They've been meeting at her friend Jessica's apartment in West Hollywood, the one she claimed she was using for foundation planning meetings. I have security footage from the building, timestamps that correspond perfectly with her business meetings. They've been planning to wait until after our first wedding anniversary to file for divorce, because in California, that would entitle her to half of everything I've earned during our marriage." The legal implications hit the room like a bomb. Cassandra's lawyers were now both on their phones, clearly trying to figure out damage control. The private investigator also discovered that this isn't her first time running this kind of scheme. She was married before, briefly, to a tech entrepreneur in San Francisco. Similar pattern: whirlwind romance, expensive wedding, mysterious death of the husband in an accident, and a convenient inheritance. The husband's family suspected foul play, but could never prove anything. My blood ran cold. This wasn't just theft and adultery. This was a pattern. I confronted her about the theft 2 days ago, Mom. She didn't deny it. She laughed. She actually laughed and said I was too naive to understand how the real world worked. She said she deserved that money for putting up with my boring charity work and my clingy mother. Those were her exact words. That last part hit me like a physical blow. My clingy mother. Is that how she saw our relationship? The Sunday phone calls where we'd talk for hours about everything and nothing? The grocery runs where he'd insist on carrying all the heavy bags? The terrible puns we'd text back and forth that made us both laugh until we cried? The love that had sustained me through decades of being alone after his father died? She told me she was planning to take me for everything I was worth, and then she'd finally be free to live the life she deserved with Marcus. She said I was a means to an end, a stepping stone to the lifestyle she'd always wanted. But she made one crucial mistake, Mom. She underestimated how well I know you, and how much I learned from watching you survive and thrive after Dad died. I remembered those years after Daniel's father passed away from a heart attack when Daniel was only 12. I'd been devastated, lost, unsure how to be both mother and father to a grieving boy while dealing with my own overwhelming grief. But we'd survived together, Daniel and I, figuring out how to build a new kind of family, how to find joy again, how to honor the memory of the man we'd both loved while creating new traditions and new dreams. You taught me that real love protects the people you care about, even when they can't protect themselves. You taught me that sometimes the strongest thing you can do is plan for the worst while hoping for the best. And you taught me that trust should be earned, not assumed. Lawrence paused, turning to the next page of the letter. The rustling of paper was the only sound in the room. So here's what she didn't know. Mom, I changed my will 3 days ago. Everything she thinks she's inherited, it's not real. The will that was just read is my old will. The one I wrote when I still believed I'd married someone who loved me for who I was, not for what I could give her. Cassandra's face had gone from pale to gray to green. She looked like she might actually be sick. What does that mean? What the hell does that mean? She whispered, but there was no fight left in her voice. Lawrence set down the letter and picked up another document, this one much thicker than the first will. It means, Mrs. Rivera. Oh, I'm sorry, did I say Rivera? I meant Mrs. Thompson, that the will I just read was Daniel's previous will, dated March 15th of this year. This, he held up the new document, is his actual final will, dated June 30th, just 3 days before his death. The implications hung in the air like smoke. June 30th, Daniel had changed his will just 3 days before he died. 3 days after confronting Cassandra about her theft and her affair. The two lawyers flanking Cassandra started whispering urgently to each other, their professional composure cracking as they realized their client's situation had just gone from advantageous to catastrophic. I saw one of them pulling out a phone, probably to call their malpractice insurance company. According to Daniel's final will, Lawrence continued, his voice taking on a formal tone that made each word feel like the pronouncement of a judge, all of his assets, including his business holdings, investment accounts, real estate properties, intellectual property rights, and the Daniel Thompson Foundation for Mental Health Access, are to be held in the Eleanor Thompson Trust, with Mrs. Thompson as the sole beneficiary and trustee. The words hit me like a wave. Everything. Daniel had left me everything. Not just the money, not just the house, but his entire legacy, his life's work, the foundation that meant more to him than any material possession. That's impossible, Cassandra screamed, her composure finally cracking completely. Her voice was shrill now, desperate, the mask of the grieving widow finally slipping to reveal the calculating predator underneath. I'm his wife. I have rights. You can't just disinherit a spouse. Actually, Lawrence said, with the calm satisfaction of a man who'd been preparing for this moment, you can. California law provides for spousal inheritance unless the deceased specifically disinherits their spouse in a properly executed will with clear evidence of intent. Daniel did exactly that. Furthermore, he included what's called a no-contest clause. If you challenge this will in any way, you forfeit even the personal effects he originally left you. Lawrence pulled out another document. Additionally, Daniel filed for divorce on June 29th, the day before he changed his will. The papers were never served because he died first, but the filing is legally valid and demonstrates his clear intent to end the marriage. I sat there in stunned silence, trying to process what was happening. My son, my sweet, quiet boy, had orchestrated this entire thing from beyond the grave. He'd planned this confrontation, this revelation, this moment of perfect justice. Even in death, he was still protecting me, still fighting for what was right. But Lawrence wasn't finished reading the letter. He turned to what appeared to be the final page, his expression growing even more serious. Mom, I know this is a lot to take in, but there's one more thing you need to know, and it's the most important part of this entire letter. The night before I died, Cassandra and I had a terrible fight about the will change. When I told her I knew about the theft, about Marcus, about everything, she became violent in a way I'd never seen before. The room fell dead silent, except for the hum of the air conditioning and the distant sound of traffic from the street below. She threatened me, Mom, not just with divorce or public humiliation, but with physical harm. She said if I didn't change the will back and give her access to the foundation accounts, she'd make sure I regretted it. She said she'd find a way to make me pay for humiliating her, for ruining her plans. Those were her exact words, ruining her plans. I felt my blood turn to ice. This was what I'd suspected, what I'd feared, what everyone had told me was just grief-induced paranoia. She said she knew how to make things look like accidents. She told me about her first husband, the tech entrepreneur, And she laughed when she described how easy it had been to push him down the stairs when he caught her transferring money to offshore accounts. She called it poetic justice and said I was even easier to fool than he had been. Cassandra was completely white now, her breathing shallow and rapid. One of her lawyers was trying to get her attention, probably to tell her to stop talking, but she seemed to be in shock. I don't know what she's capable of, but I'm scared, Mom. Really scared. If something happens to me, please make sure the police see this letter. I've hidden copies in 3 different locations, and I've sent one to my friend Jake with instructions to open it if anything happens to me. I've also installed hidden security cameras throughout the house. Cameras that Cassandra doesn't know about, with footage that uploads automatically to a secure server. Lawrence paused, letting the implications sink in. There's more, Mrs. Thompson. Daniel included very specific instructions about evidence collection and law enforcement notification. I love you. I love... Mom, Lawrence continued reading. You gave me everything that mattered in life. Unconditional love, unwavering support, and the strength to keep going when everything seemed impossible. Now, I want to give you the security and peace you deserve. Take care of the foundation for me, but more importantly, take care of yourself. You're stronger than you know, and you're about to prove it. Use this money to help people, to continue the work we started together, and to live the life you deserve after spending so many years taking care of everyone else. My vision was blurring with tears now, but I forced myself to keep listening. And Mom, don't let anyone tell you that you're too old or too fragile to handle this responsibility. You raised a son who built an empire from nothing, who touched millions of lives, who never forgot where he came from, or who taught him how to love. You did that. Your love, your guidance, your example, if you could raise someone like me, you can handle anything the world throws at you. The letter concluded with, all my love, always and forever, Daniel. P.S. Tell Cassandra that karma is real, and it's coming for her with interest. The silence that followed was the kind that feels like the whole world is holding its breath, waiting to see what happens next. I looked across the table at Cassandra, who was staring at Lawrence with the expression of someone who just watched their entire life implode in real time. Her careful composure was completely gone, replaced by something that looked like genuine terror. You killed him, I said quietly. It wasn't a question anymore. It was a statement of fact. That's insane, she hissed, but her voice was shaking so badly she could barely get the words out. He fell down the stairs. It was an accident. I wasn't even there. He was 28 years old and in perfect health. He ran marathons for fun, did yoga every morning, had the reflexes of an athlete. You expect me to believe he just happened to fall down stairs he climbed every day, stairs that weren't steep or poorly lit or dangerous in any way? People fall sometimes, she protested, but even she didn't sound convinced anymore. Lawrence cleared his throat. Mrs. Thompson, Daniel also included very specific instructions regarding evidence he collected about both the charity theft and his concerns about his personal safety. Everything has been turned over to both the police and the district attorney's office. There's an investigation already underway, and Detective Morrison specifically asked me to inform him as soon as this will reading was complete. Cassandra's face went from white to green. I need to leave. Now. Right now. Actually, Lawrence said, reaching for his phone with the calm efficiency of someone who'd been planning this moment for weeks. I was instructed to call Detective Morrison as soon as this will reading was complete. Daniel wanted to make sure you'd be available for questioning about both the financial crimes and the circumstances surrounding his death. The next few minutes were a blur of Cassandra screaming about harassment and false accusations while her lawyers frantically made phone calls and tried to control the situation. But all I could think about was my son, planning this moment from beyond the grave, making sure his mother would be protected and his real legacy would survive. One of her lawyers was pulling at her arm, trying to get her to stop talking, but Cassandra seemed to have lost all self-control. This is ridiculous, she kept saying. You can't prove anything. It was an accident. People don't get murdered for changing their wills. Actually, I said, standing up slowly and feeling a strength I hadn't known I possessed. People get murdered for a lot less than millions of dollars and a ruined con game, and people certainly get murdered when they threaten to expose their killers to the police. Lawrence was on the phone now, speaking quietly to someone who was clearly law enforcement. I heard him saying things like, yes, the will reading is complete, and she's here now, and we'll wait for you to arrive. Cassandra tried to bolt for the door, but her lawyers blocked her path, probably realizing that running would look even worse than staying. She collapsed back into her chair, all the fight gone out of her. looking for the first time like what she really was. A predator who'd finally been caught. The security footage from Daniel's house, Lawrence said, hanging up the phone. The hidden cameras he mentioned in his letter. They caught everything that happened the night he died. Everything. And that's when Cassandra finally broke completely. The mask she'd worn for months, the grieving widow, the devastated partner, the woman who'd lost the love of her life. It all crumbled away to reveal the cold, calculating killer underneath. "It wasn't supposed to happen like that," she whispered, so quietly that we all had to strain to hear her. "He wasn't supposed to fight back. He wasn't supposed to be so strong." Her lawyers immediately started shouting at her to stop talking, but it was too late. The confession was out there, witnessed by everyone in the room. "He was going to ruin everything," she continued, tears streaming down her face. But they weren't tears of grief. They were tears of rage and frustration. "I worked so hard, planned so carefully. He was supposed to be easy, like the others, but he had to be noble, had to be honest, had to protect his precious foundation and his clingy mother." The room fell silent, except for Cassandra's ragged breathing and the sound of sirens in the distance. Getting closer. It took 6 weeks for the investigation to conclude. 6 weeks during which I learned things about my daughter-in-law that made me grateful Daniel had discovered the truth before it was too late. The affair with Marcus Rivera had been going on for 4 months, not 2. She'd stolen almost $300,000, not 200. And the security cameras Daniel had installed without telling her showed footage that made my blood run cold. The hidden cameras had captured everything. Cassandra arriving home that evening, not from a nail salon, but from Marcus Rivera's apartment. Daniel confronting her in their entryway about the divorce papers and the evidence of her crimes. The argument that escalated into violence when she realized her carefully laid plans were crumbling. And finally, the moment when she pushed my son down those marble stairs, then calmly waited 20 minutes before calling 911 to establish her timeline. The footage showed her staging the scene, messing up her hair and makeup, even deliberately staining her dress with Daniel's blood to look like she'd tried to help him. She'd been so confident in her performance, so sure she'd gotten away with the perfect crime. They arrested her on charges of embezzlement, fraud, and first-degree murder. The evidence was overwhelming, and when faced with life in prison, even her high-powered legal team couldn't save her. She was eventually convicted on all counts and sentenced to life without the possibility of parole. Marcus Rivera, her lover, received 10 years for conspiracy and money laundering, when it turned out he'd been helping her move the stolen foundation funds through fake endorsement deals and shell companies. The fitness influencer's empire crumbled overnight when his followers learned he'd been profiting from stolen charity money. 3 months after the trial ended, I was sitting in Daniel's office, my office now, in the beautiful house in the Hollywood Hills that I'd inherited along with everything else. The irony wasn't lost on me that at 72, I was finally learning how to run a business, manage millions of dollars, and navigate the world my son had built. It wasn't easy. There were days when the grief felt like it would crush me. When I missed his voice so badly, I'd call his phone just to hear his voicemail message. But there were also days when I felt his presence so strongly, it was like he was standing right beside me, watching me discover strengths I never knew I had. The foundation was thriving under my leadership. We'd not only recovered the stolen funds, but had expanded our programs dramatically. I'd hired a team of experienced nonprofit managers and mental health professionals, people who shared Daniel's vision and understood that helping others wasn't just charity, it was a calling. We now provided free therapy to over 15,000 people annually. We'd expanded Daniel's original vision to include programs for elder abuse prevention, financial literacy for seniors, and legal aid for people facing family-related financial fraud. Every time we helped someone who reminded me of my old self, someone who'd been made to feel small and unimportant, I felt Daniel's approval. The best part, though, was discovering that Daniel had been working on a new program just before he died. In his personal notes, I found detailed plans for support groups specifically designed for elderly people dealing with financial abuse from family members. He'd researched it extensively, recognizing that elder abuse was often invisible and unreported. "Mom always taught me to stand up for people who can't stand up for themselves," he'd written in his notes. "Now I want to make sure she never has to feel vulnerable again." Even in death, my boy was still taking care of me. I kept his office exactly as he'd left it, with his awards and photos and the little succulent plant I'd given him for his birthday. Sometimes I'd sit at his desk and feel like he was guiding my hands as I signed checks and approved grants. The foundation's work had become my life's purpose, the thing that got me up every morning and gave meaning to my days. The money Daniel left me was more than I could spend in 10 lifetimes. The house alone was worth $8 million, and that was just the beginning. But the real inheritance Daniel gave me wasn't financial. It was the knowledge that I'd raised a son who loved me enough to protect me even after death, who saw my worth when I couldn't see it myself, and who trusted me to carry on something bigger than both of us. Sometimes late at night, when I was working in his office, I swear I could hear him laughing. Not the polite laughter of someone trying to make others feel better, but the real, delighted laughter of someone who just witnessed perfect justice. "Got her, didn't we, Mom?" I could almost hear him saying. "Yes, sweetheart, we certainly did. I still wear that navy blue dress sometimes, the one he bought me for Mother's Day. But now I wear it to board meetings and press conferences and court dates. I wear it when I need to remember that love doesn't end with death, it just transforms into something more powerful." Daniel had been right about me being stronger than I knew. For years, I'd been the quiet mother, the one who stayed in the background while her son built his empire. I'd thought my role was to worry and support and fade quietly into the background of his success. But it turned out my son saw something in me that I'd never seen in myself. He saw a woman who could carry on his work, protect his legacy, and fight for justice when it mattered most. He saw someone who wouldn't back down when facing a woman 30 years younger who thought age meant weakness. I spent decades thinking my job was to fade gracefully into old age, to become smaller and quieter and less demanding. Instead, I discovered that 72 might just be the perfect age to stop caring what people think and start caring about what's right. Every Sunday, I still set the table for 2 out of habit. But now instead of feeling empty, it feels full of memories, full of purpose, full of the kind of love that doesn't end just because someone's not physically there to receive it, and strong enough to make sure that no one ever again underestimates what a 72-year-old mother is capable of when someone threatens her child's legacy. Now, I'm curious about you who listen to my story. What would you do if you were in my place? Have you ever been through something similar? Comment below. It took 6 weeks for the investigation to conclude. 6 weeks during which I learned things about my daughter-in-law that made me grateful Daniel had discovered the truth before it was too late. The affair with Marcus Rivera had been going on for 4 months, not 2. She'd stolen almost $300,000, not 200. And the security cameras Daniel had installed without telling her showed that on the day he died, she hadn't been getting her nails done. She'd been in the house, and the last footage of Daniel showed him alive and well, talking animatedly to someone off camera just 20 minutes before Cassandra found his body. They arrested her on charges of embezzlement, fraud, and suspected homicide. The murder case is still being built, but the financial crimes were ironclad. Daniel had documented everything meticulously, like he was building a case he knew he might not live to present. 3 months later, I was sitting in the office of Daniel's charity foundation, which I had renamed the Daniel Thompson Foundation for Mental Health and Justice. The irony wasn't lost on me that at 72, I was finally learning how to run a business, manage millions of dollars, and navigate the world my son had built. It wasn't easy. There were days when the grief felt like it would crush me. When I missed his voice so badly, I'd call his phone just to hear his voicemail message. But there were also days when I felt his presence so strongly, it was like he was standing right beside me, watching me discover strengths I never knew I had. The foundation was thriving. We'd not only recovered the stolen funds, but had expanded our programs to include legal aid for victims of domestic violence and financial fraud. It felt right, using Daniel's legacy to help people who'd been taken advantage of the way he was. I kept his house too, the one Cassandra had been so eager to claim. I moved out of my little apartment and into the beautiful home my son had built, surrounding myself with his memories and his dreams. His office became my office, and sometimes I'd sit at his desk and feel like he was guiding my hands as I signed checks and approved grants. The best part, though, was discovering that Daniel had been planning to propose a new program just before he died. He'd wanted to create support groups for elderly people dealing with financial abuse from family members. He'd researched it extensively, recognizing that elder abuse was often invisible and unreported. "Mom always taught me to stand up for people who can't stand up for themselves," he'd written in his notes. "Now I want to make sure she never has to feel vulnerable again." Even in death, my boy was still taking care of me. Cassandra was eventually convicted of embezzlement and fraud. The murder charges were harder to prove without a witness, but she got 15 years for the financial crimes. Marcus Rivera, her lover, had his assets frozen when it turned out he'd been helping her launder the stolen money through fake endorsement deals. The day the verdict came down, I sat in my son's beautiful kitchen and allowed myself to feel something I hadn't felt since the day he died: peace. Daniel had been right about me being stronger than I knew. For years, I'd been the quiet mother, the one who stayed in the background while her son built his empire. I'd thought my role was to worry and support and fade quietly into the background of his success. But it turned out my son saw something in me that I'd never seen in myself. He saw a woman who could carry on his work, protect his legacy, and fight for justice when it mattered most. He saw someone who wouldn't back down when facing a woman 30 years younger who thought age meant weakness. I spent decades thinking my job was to fade gracefully into old age, to become smaller and quieter and less demanding. Instead, I discovered that 72 might just be the perfect age to stop caring what people think and start caring about what's right. The foundation now helps over 10,000 people annually. We've expanded Daniel's original vision to include programs for elder abuse prevention, financial literacy for seniors, and legal aid for people facing family-related financial fraud. Every time we help someone who reminds me of my old self, someone who's been made to feel small and unimportant, I feel Daniel's approval. Sometimes late at night, when I'm working in his office, I swear I can hear him laughing. Not the polite laughter of someone trying to make others feel better, but the real delighted laughter of someone who's just witnessed perfect justice. "Got her, didn't we, Mom?" I can almost hear him saying. "Yes, sweetheart, we certainly did. I still wear that navy blue dress sometimes, the one he bought me for Mother's Day. But now I wear it to board meetings and press conferences and court dates. I wear it when I need to remember that love doesn't end with death. It just transforms into something more powerful." Cassandra sent me a letter from prison last month. She wanted to apologize and ask for my forgiveness, and wondered if there was any way the foundation might help with her legal fees for her appeal. I read it twice, showed it to my lawyer, and then did something that would have made Daniel very proud. I sent her a sympathy card, the kind you send when someone dies. Inside, I wrote, "So sorry for your loss. With deepest condolences on the death of your credibility, your freedom, and your scheme. May you rest in peace, Eleanor." Perhaps that was petty, but at 72, having buried my only child and discovered my own strength in the process, I figure I've earned the right to a little pettiness. The money Daniel left me is more than I could spend in 10 lifetimes. The foundation will continue long after I'm gone, helping people who need advocates, people who need someone to believe in them when their own families have let them down. But the real inheritance Daniel gave me wasn't money. It was the knowledge that I raised a son who loved me enough to protect me even after death, who saw my worth when I couldn't see it myself, and who trusted me to carry on something bigger than both of us. Every Sunday, I still set the table for two out of habit. But now, instead of feeling empty, it feels full of memories, full of purpose, full of the kind of love that doesn't end just because someone's not physically there to receive it. Daniel was right about one thing. I am stronger than I knew. Strong enough to run a multi-million-dollar foundation. Strong enough to face down a killer in a conference room. Strong enough to turn grief into justice and pain into purpose. And strong enough to make sure that no one ever again underestimates what a 72-year-old mother is capable of when someone threatens her child's legacy. Now, I'm curious about you who listened to my story. What would you do if you were in my place? Have you ever been through something similar? Comment below. Thanks for listening. Don't forget to subscribe and feel free to share your story in the comments. Your voice matters.